Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon for those that are in the Singapore time zone, and for those that are dialing in from other places, so possibly good morning or good evening. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Patsian Loh. I am the Chief of Staff and Policy Advisor for AVPN, and my apologies for our slightly late start today. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we hope to have them already resolved. Thank you again for joining us at today's webinar, Revolutionizing Education Systems in a Post-COVID-19 Future. We are very glad to have you join us, but before we begin proper, I'd like to just give you a very short introduction to the session today to set the context. The COVID-19 pandemic has displaced more than 1.8 billion students from their schools and has created unprecedented shifts in public education systems. Overnight, schools around the world are forced to digitize entire curriculums as students move towards home-based learning. Although technology has facilitated this leap in education, the crisis has also challenged us to think about the resilience of our education systems and its ability and readiness to cope with similar crises in the future. So in this session, we have invited speakers from China and Malaysia who will share their unique experiences and approaches in addressing the gaps in areas such as accessibility to online learning platforms and tools, digital literacy and competency of educators, last mile internet connectivity, and ensuring positive learning outcomes, particularly for rural communities. Our session today is meant to run approximately 90 minutes and we'll have two segments. We first will have case presentations by Mr. Donnie Lee and Dr. Xiaoyan Wang, whom I will introduce shortly. They will be sharing case studies in China's unique experience, followed by a very, very brief Q&A segment. And then we will have a panel discussion where we will hear from key players in the education sector in both Malaysia and China. So a few housekeeping matters, please. We are going to open up the Q&A chat box. You should see it already throughout today's session. Please leave your questions for the speakers in this chat box, and you could also view and upvote other participants' questions if they are of interest to you. Do note that today's session is going to be recorded by AVPN. This recording, as well as any other relevant resources from the speakers, will be subsequently uploaded onto AVPN's events website after this webinar. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our case presenters today, Dr. Wang Xiaoyan and Mr. Donnie Lee. Dr. Wang Xiaoyan is a researcher from Sichuan Normal University, and she recently completed her postdoctoral research at Beijing Normal University, focusing on the application of the internet technology in primary education. She graduated from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and her research direction is communication and social development, focusing on children's rights and media literacy education for children. Mr. Donnie Lee is a director of the 21st Century Education Research Institute. He is a graduate from Stanford University with backgrounds in both education and mechanical engineering. Through his teaching and leadership experience in schools that serve a diverse range of contexts, he has developed an acute understanding of the inner workings of schools. He now leads the Institute's Center on Rural Education and advocates for full-service schools, a model of school development that emphasizes holistic care for children's physical, socio-emotional, and intellectual needs. I'd like to check on the sound from Dr. Wang, please. Dr. Wang, if you could say a few words before we turn the floor over to you. Dr. Wang? Dr. Wang, I'm afraid we are still not able to hear you on audio. Let me take this technical problem with you offline, and we will turn back to you shortly for your presentation. In the meantime, may I ask for Mr. Donnie Lee, if you could share your presentation first?
Yeah, sure,
Mr.
definitely.
Donnie Lee, are you ready?
Yeah.
Excellent. If I may ask the organizers to please get ready Mr. Lee's slides, and Donnie, the floor is now yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm Donnie with 21st Century Education Research Institute here in Beijing. And first of all, I'd like to thank AVPN for organizing this event and for everyone who's online for joining with us to hear from our observations on COVID-19's impact on education in China and how the country has responded. Perhaps because I come from a background both in mechanical engineering and education, when I was trying to think of words for the title of this presentation, impact and inertia came into my mind. I think, next page please. When a system is faced with impact, the more mass it has, the more inertia we're likely to feel. And this is manifested clearly when we look at the system as large as the system of public schooling, especially at the national level in a country as large as China. And next, please. So here I'd like to show two images which went viral in February when online learning was first rolling out. In those pictures, we see, you know, the most advanced iPad, maybe iPad 2020, iPad Pro, whatever it is, and whose price took a surge actually when online learning was first brought out. But if you look carefully, it's not an Apple Pencil writing on the screen, but a Sharpie writing on clean field, so that student could finish his homework, which is no different from what you'd find from a conventional exercise book. This was an ingenious solution some parents came up with so that they don't need to pay for printers and cartridge. There's a phrase called old wine in new bottle in China, which I think describes exactly what this is. So it's not that we haven't done any preparation or development in the field of online education. A lot has been done in the past years. But when China was faced with the hit of COVID-19, I think our internet or online learning industry, which is at the same time immense and also segmented, was not particularly prepared. So when mega companies like Alibaba and Tencent rushed into this industry on the COVID-19, there's little room for small companies or small products and services that has perhaps been better in content, but unprepared for the volume. So when online companies hold their own user base, you're likely to see multiple apps or platforms and softwares being used for the same single outcome, which is to mimic and copy paste what offline learning has been for the past decades. So in this case, this year, we've seen perhaps one platform for online streaming, which teachers stream their classes to the students or through TV channels, and then another app for assigning homework to students and parents, and multiple ways students complete those homeworks. Maybe they have both online versions and offline versions, and then they use another app perhaps to send it back to the teachers. The teachers probably either graded on the screen or had to print those copies out for grading and providing feedback. So the actual experience was quite messy for the end user, the student, and more importantly, most likely the poorer regions you're in, the less prepared the situation would be. And especially when you don't have parents who are particularly tech savvy, then the outcome can be quite poor. This has made it particularly hard for rural China and underdeveloped regions, or in families that don't have the resources or the technology to facilitate this kind of learning. Next, please. Yeah. So I think this has led us to discuss another form of inertia, which is the problem of inequality that persists and perhaps widens in this time. Any gap, I think, whether it's digital gap or whatever, it's most likely at its core a human gap. In rural China, Dr. Wang's data, which I saw earlier and probably the audience would see a bit later, showed that 62% of users in rural China had to use smartphones for online streaming, which we all know is not technology that's particularly designed for online learning, nor is it a device that software engineers have made tailored arrangements too when they're devising their learning software. So whether it's problems of eyesight or whether it's the effectiveness of such online learning, we haven't been particularly sensitive to a lot of a big section of the user group. And furthermore, as we've discussed that the learning, a lot of responsibility has been shifted from teachers to students so that they manage their own learning. We are seeing that this human gap has created a lot of issues. Our schools are not particularly prepared to teach independent learning. To give another example, in the past years in China, in the online education market, companies that use a one teacher streaming to multiple, maybe hundreds and students at the same time, and then use human tutors to nag students to complete homework. This form of online learning has been much more successful than independent learning platforms like the ones we know, for example, Khan Academy. So I think this same situation is reflected in how schools teach students, particularly schools or weaker schools. And when online education comes in, it's not a guarantee that everyone is prepared for independent learning. Yeah, so next page, please. So when schools resume, mostly in April and some places later in China, what we are seeing is another form of immersion, which means that little has changed. But what we see is an urge to go back to the normal. Our team at the Research Institute went on to visits to multiple provinces in rural China over the past 2 months. And then most teachers report that students have learned little in their time at home through online learning. The government in those regions also require that schools begin from zero, meaning that whatever you've taught online, you teach those again, so that to ensure nobody is left behind. But we all know that's only a hypothesis, but never the reality. Always there are people left behind. So yeah, next please. But there are some good news. Even though schools are only teaching, schools in rural China, a lot of them are only teaching Chinese and math at the moment, so that they can catch back with the pace and then complete the curriculum design for this year. A lot of kids are now liking going to school, which they probably didn't before, for the simple reason that they miss their friends and they miss the activities that schools provide. And I think parents now have a better sense of how hard it is to be a teacher, that they know that teaching is a professional field that they are not adequately prepared for. So probably we are going to see a lot more respect and people giving a lot more attention to schools, which, you know, over the past years, we're talking a lot about, you know, the falling and failing of modern schooling, which now sort of dies down. And there are a few cases, perhaps not that many, but at least I've heard some that I think have done better in encouraging students to create actually good online learning experiences. For example, some schools have implemented school-wide mentoring system, meaning that they would have one teacher that closely look after a group of 5 to 10 students, and then when they see each other online, they don't only talk about academics, but have a place to chat about their home experience. And some other schools have given students a lot more time to explore their own interests. For example, one school that I know have limited their online teaching to only 3 hours a day, and then but give each student 30 minutes per student, even if it's only elementary school, third grade, 30 minutes a student to talk about their own interests. And the teachers tell me that students share wonderful stories and their insights about dinosaurs. And even though they're in third grade, they can talk for 30 minutes and nobody would lose track of their attention. So I think these are great changes that we're seeing. But I hope a lot more could be spread on a national level and globally. And next one, please. Yeah. So finally, I think with the sort of inertia which we've seen from the impact of COVID-19, I think it provides a great reminder for us to rethink what schools are for. Modern schooling is characterized not only by the one-size-fits-all curriculum and the boring timetable, but I think more importantly and fundamentally by the human relationships developed in such an organization, that between students and their peers, with their teachers and schools, and between schools and communities, and teachers and parents and so forth. It would be good if we could learn to cherish those relationships and capitalize those relationships to make them an important part of what makes the education of future. And I think if we were to speak a little more about online education and in an attempt to close the digital gap, personally, I see a possibility. It would be the IT class. So schools in China are required to have at least one IT class per week. But in rural China, mostly schools are just about to have installed computers and internet. I mean, the project has been pretty much completed on the national level. But when we visited rural schools, the sort of IT class they would have is no different from what I had in a city school 20 years ago. It would be, typing and word processing. Even though the computers are connected to the internet, teachers would say that students always lose track of time and pay their attention to random different things that they don't think is valuable. And a lot of kids would get too trapped by games or information or pieces of articles or images and videos that are not good for the kids outgoing. But I think the internet is truly our biggest human technological asset. With the amount of rich and both in form and in content, I mean, it's very rich. We need to do is to make it much more child friendly. In India, I know there's a school called School in the Cloud, where students are given the opportunity to sit in front of computers and scan through valuable learning resources and find whatever they see interesting and dig in. I think there's a lot more potential in that. In countries like China, when we have rigid school system and a rigid national curriculum, particularly for kids in rural China, I think it's very important to give them an opportunity for personal exploration where they can dive deeply. And I think the internet is designed for it. So wait to see more of this in China and more people and organizations if we can join in this endeavor. Well, that's all from my side. I'd like to thank you again for attention and for the opportunity to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donnie. And I can already see that there are some questions coming in for you. Well, I asked my colleagues to just once again double check if Dr. Wang's connection is ready and able to speak to us. Maybe I could raise a question to you for you to answer. You mentioned it towards the last part of your presentation that there is an opportunity to build on the relationships that the students and teachers have with the community and with parents. If I could ask you to go one level higher and share with us what are some of your thoughts about how you see partnerships between schools, government, and non-state actors and other private operators and foundations, etc. How do you see these different relationships coming together to support the needs of education in your work?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, for this year, because a lot of things sort of come in or in a rush altogether. So I think from someone who doesn't particularly work in this partnership, but as an observer, we're probably not able to see what we've hoped for. But I think, and I do believe much has been done, but maybe we just haven't kept the pace fast enough, to go up and beyond to the level of what we would hope. So, to organize mass online learning is not easy. It's both a technical challenge and a human challenge. But then, as I've said earlier, we haven't particularly seen the sort of more on the quality level, if we've made much improvements. What we've seen is still a very rough form of online learning. And I think there are platforms, as I mentioned, there are Chinese versions of Khan Academy, or platforms that have been inspired by Khan Academy, and companies and social ventures trying to do independent learning, or to open a much wider world of learning for the students. But then those companies, because of their nature, they focus a lot on the content. Maybe they're not prepared for the volume at the moment. So I think it's going to be very dynamic as it moves on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Donnie. And I think the dynamic and constantly evolving nature is already anyway the case with the education system, but now we have the additional pressure of recovery post-crisis.
Right.
I think let's then look at the question that had come through from the audience. What do you think are some scalable and profitable opportunities in the K-12 space, particularly given that technology is going to play such a big role? What are your thoughts?
Right. So we've looked at, and this is not new to COVID-19. I think it's been a model that's pretty mature, which we have dual teacher classrooms, which you have one teacher on the cloud and another teacher on the local. But there's a still wide variety and disparity in the quality of such services being provided. From our observation, I would say that teaching is always a human experience, and being anyone on the tech or the business side, we have to be very respectful of this nature. And so what we've seen is more likely programs that have one teacher talk all the time and have students listen, or maybe 250 classes listen at the same time, and yet the teacher can't see them, those are more likely to fail. If it's a teacher that is there to provide simple sort of methods, say how to fold a paper, how to build a handcraft, things like that, I think the internet can be quite good, because it's very clear, the steps are easy to follow. If you don't hear a particular word, it's not too big a problem. So I think, in rural China, we've seen a lot of success of art and music classes done through online medium, and less likely if a class is particularly academically challenging, then teachers also in urban environments, even though they can be a very good teacher, they're unfamiliar with where students come from, and so to have that good teacher speak rural students doesn't always play out. Yeah, so I think online teaching, dual teacher model, but make it simple, and that could work well. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Donnie. And I think you've set us now on stage to think quite imaginatively about what could be the future. There is another question, which if I could ask you, Donnie, to perhaps try to answer later on when we open the floor for more questions from the audience. And that has got to do with your perspective on the future of schools after COVID, including elements like homeschooling or other alternative forms of education that may be considered. But if I could ask you to think on that question for a little bit, while we once again check in with Dr. Wang to see if she's been able to connect to us. Thank you, Donnie. I'm going to temporarily put you on mute while I check in with Dr. Wang.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wang, if you could hear us, could you say a few words, please? Dr. Wang, I'm afraid I am still having difficulty hearing you. Let us ask you to once again check in with your audio settings. We can hear some scratchy noises, but I'm afraid I can't hear your volume very well. If you could check your audio setting one more time. In the meantime, I'd like to also share with everyone that after the sharing from both Dr. Wang and Mr. Donnie Lee, we will be going into a panel conversation between different participants different speakers that represent the education sector in Malaysia and China. And we continue to invite you to please put your questions through as well. I'd like to ask for Donnie, if you want to now at this point make a few comments about the question I raised to you earlier about the future of schooling and alternative forms of education in the post-COVID environment. Any thoughts from you on that question?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to speak on that. I think in China, probably starting from 2017, there is a lot more discussion about innovative education disrupting schools, concepts like such, which are partially brought back from the Silicon Valley, right? Alt school movement, the Conlab school, and so forth. And also homeschooling as well. But at the moment, I think education is impacted not only by the wills of educators, but also by national and international challenges that we are seeing, and changing dynamics at the moment. So, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people would like to put a lot more emphasis on human relationships and return back to human relationships that which is what schools are funded on. And I think, for any type of schooling that we're talking about, we've sort of gone a little too far on the one size fit all curriculum side. Or even if we have adaptive learning, it's still we are adaptive so that everyone could learn up to the same goals, right? We very, personally, I see that education needs to be a mixture of probably 3 different kinds of things. I think one is you have a curriculum because education nowadays is very public. You have something that you would want everyone in a civil society would want to know and want to agree with each other on that. And then the second is a human socializing experience, which everyone grow social emotionally, and they learn about rules and they learn about such. I think schools are still a great invention for that. However, what we've been missing is that we're now seeing public schooling or our modern schooling occupying the entirety of students' time. Students don't learn to cook, they don't do chores anymore, they don't farm, right? They spend their entire time on homework and tutoring. They're missing their own time. They're missing their time to engage with our world that is very complex and very dynamic. So I personally don't see, much too drastic change going on with schools, but I would hope that schools could return. And I don't think it's the job of schools alone, but the society as a whole to allow children more time for freedom. A lot of good things would happen when you have freedom. If that's not to happen, though, then we are probably waiting for a revolution of schools. That's going to be very disruptive, but I'm not seeing that yet. And for any other forms of new schools, at the moment, I don't think they're particularly visible yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donnie. Apologies, took me another second to turn off my mute button. I think it's clearly an opportunity, but the introduction and implementation of alternative forms of education does require other elements of the ecosystem to be ready. So
yes,
there's clearly more to do. Thank you so much for answering that question. And as you are speaking, oh, I can hear someone.
Hi, this looks like Veronica, but it's actually Dr. Wang. So we worked out a solution here. Could she talk through my cell phone? And hi, Dr. Wang, could you hear the panelist? Could you hear the other panelists?
This.
What's that? Okay.
Okay, there may be a slight lag, and I think we are happy to have Dr. Wang on audio through your phone. Veronica, could we try Dr. Wang one more time? Dr. Wang, if you can hear us, please say a few words.
Hi. Thank you, Vivian. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. My name is Xiaoyan Wang, and I just completed my postdoctoral research at Beijing Normal University last year. Currently, I am a researcher at Sichuan Normal University in China. Many thanks for the invitation from AVPN, and I appreciate having this opportunity to share what China has done on e-learning during the COVID-19 pandemic and our learning and insights. My presentation today has 5 parts. Because of the COVID-19, education and teaching activities in primary and secondary schools couldn't be carried out as usual, and the education department required all students, about 150 million, to study at home using online platforms. On January 27, 2020, the Ministry of Education of the People's Republic of China required that the spring semester of 2020, which would normally start around February 10, be postponed till a further date. Before February 10, the children had just celebrated the spring festival. On February 12, the Ministry of Education required schools in all regions to provide free learning resources for primary and secondary school students across the country. At the same time, considering the lack of internet or no internet speed in some rural areas, the government also arranged for China Education Television to broadcast rich courses through TV channels to solve the problem of home learning for students in this area. All schools have also deployed e-learning for students in accordance with local conditions. In addition, private companies providing tutoring classes during the epidemic, they announced that they will provide free or partial free classes or platforms to the public. By the way, these policies of the education department are constantly being adjusted and optimized. Judging from the development of education informatization in recent years, currently e-learning has been integrated in different regions and different grades, which provides a realistic basis for the implementation of e-learning in emergency situations. According to the report released by China Internet Network Information Center in March 2020, the number of e-learning users in China has reached 423 million. It can be seen that during the epidemic, the number of e-learning users has increased by 18.6%, driven by the fact that all students are basically studying online at home. Next, what I want to share with you is a survey I conducted in cooperation with the Zhongguancun Internet Education Innovation Center, which is an internet educational incubator in Beijing. My research is focused on e-learning in primary and secondary schools. We collected 3,355 questionnaires we pay attention on the learning experience of parents and students. The degree of informatization of the family environment, the learning services support that parents and students receive, and the learning import of students, as well as parents' acceptance and the needs for e-learning. These parents are mainly from the Eastern, Central, and the Western China. The age of the parents is concentrated in 30 to 50 years old. Their children are mainly in elementary and junior high school. The parents' education background is concentrated in high school. Families living in cities accounted for 46.15%, and those in towns accounted for 53.85%. I will highlight a few findings from the survey. The data found that although nearly 6% of students have participated in e-learning courses before, they still lack of the ability to choose the high-quality resources. Parents and students take teachers' advice very seriously. The infrastructure of e-learning is basically complete, but special attention should be paid to people who live in remote areas. Although till March 2020, China's internet penetration rate has reached 34.5%. Mobile internet access has reached 99.3%. We still need to pay attention to remote areas and urban low-income families. Parents believe that students are insufficiently engaging in learning and worry that e-learning will affect their eyesight, and the lack of self-disciplinary will affect the students' learning results. Parents believe that the biggest advantage of e-learning is that children can study at home. After schools are reopened, nearly 60% of parents are willing to pay to get their children access to high-quality learning courses. The research has identified the following two trends. In the long run, we need to pay attention to the impact of this e-learning in remote areas. Many rural students had relatively little exposure to e-learning before. Now their use of e-learning has increased, and how it will affect in the future, we should pay more attention on this problem. We can also see that internet has been integrated into the basic education. We will see more of the integration in the future, where education is provided through a combination of online and offline means. Resources provided by schools and third-party resource providers must be holistically utilized. School must take full leverage of educational resources provided by private companies, so that more high-quality resources can be used. Further study is needed in the following areas. First, how can families support learning in the new era? During the survey, parents indicated their concern on parent-child communication. Both parents and children need to learn how to manage their emotion and how to effectively communicating with each other. The parent-child relationship has a direct impact on the learning outcomes of the students. We found that in many families, arguments arise between parents and children because of their disagreement on children's learning habits, time management, discipline, just to name a few. Tension between parents and children in turn will make children perform more poorly on their learning. Secondly, how to help students make better use of the internet? The answer to this question lies in an enhanced digital literacy of students, their parents, and the teachers as well. The development of e-learning leads to respond to the challenges brought about by new technologies, including how to make students learn, how learn to process information, learn to communicate effectively. Secondly, changing the traditional teacher-student relationship, shifting the focus of education from teachers imparting answers to students seeking answers, establishing a new family learning culture. Although those issues have been discussed for many years, this process is slow and more arduous effort is needed. This ends my presentation. Thank you for listening. I will be happy to take questions and continue the discussion even after this webinar. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Wang and Mr. Lee, for your insightful and timely reflections on the impacts of COVID on student learning. Thank you especially for joining us despite challenging connectivity issues. And Dr. Wang, if you would like to stay online in case any audience members have any questions, they will do so through the Q&A chat box. Up next, we have a panel discussion comprising of Mr. Jeff Shen, a CEO at Leping Foundation, Ms. Veronica Cho, a partner at Blue Elephant Capital, and Ms. Shanaz Al-Sadat, chairperson of the LeapEd services, to share the collaborative action they have taken in their various capacities to tackle the challenges faced in schooling and learning during this period. This panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Cheryl Ann Fernando, Director at the Pemimpin Global School Leaders Malaysia. I would now like to hand over the time to Ms. Fernando as moderator. Ms. Fernando, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rachel. A very good evening to everyone and welcome to our panel discussion where we dive deeper into the current revolution in education. We'll start with a quick introduction of our panelists today. My name is Cheryl Ann Fernando and I'll be your moderator. I lead Pemimpin Global School Leaders Malaysia, a non-profit focused on providing training, support, and coaching for government school leaders. And throughout this pandemic, we have worked to support our school leaders by conducting workshops online, remote coaching, and all other means of support that we can give them to just ensure that learning continues during this pandemic. We also worked with our school leaders to give them different types of teaching strategies on how to teach students using low bandwidth and high bandwidth. And my favorite is when we taught our school leaders on how to use WhatsApp and Telegram to deliver lessons. Today, schools are reopened in Malaysia, but we are still working to help our teachers and leaders ensure meaningful learning and ensure that online learning continues while adhering to all the SOPs in place. So that's a bit from me. If I can ask Shanaz to quickly introduce yourself as well, Shanaz? You're on mute, Shanaz.
Hold on. Sorry, yeah, I think my video was not starting. Yeah, it's okay. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Hi, I'm Shanaz. Thank you, Cheryl, and all the other panelists and the earlier presenters. I'm very happy to be here, and all the participants. A quick introduction. I will try. Let's see. I am not an educationist, given that this is an education team, so need to clarify that first. I am actually a qualified accountant and a lawyer and an investment professional. Worked 20 years in corporate sectors, but decided about 10 years ago to change my life mission and became a social entrepreneur. So and I had a mission around quality education. I know everybody talks about it, but I think I had two pet peeves, if you want to look at it. One is the belief that quality education is not just about academics. It's really about unleashing the potential of each child in order to be a good leader, good citizen in the society. Number two is that the pet peeve is that a lot of theory being talked about, but when you look at particularly in public schools, implementation-wise, is still very weak. So 10 years ago, I decided that rather than complaining, I wanted to see if I can actually gather brains around how to actually help public education system. So, well, the first entity was Teach for Malaysia. Of course, I was a founding trustee. And that's where I met Cheryl, actually. But we are very proud of Cheryl now because she's grown so much bigger than Teach for Malaysia. And a second one is, which I'm currently a chairperson of, is LeapEd Services. So LeapEd Services is a social enterprise. We set it out really to do a lot of R&D, a lot on designing and delivering whole school transformation model that currently can be done now at student or even at system level. The idea is that, you know, to shift public schools from being teacher-centric to student-centric, having just academic outcome to a holistic development. The whole culture has to be transformed, and they are continuously improving themselves, looking at data, looking at society, and so on. So yeah, so we just hit our 10-year milestones, actually. So we are now charting the next 10 years. And of course, then the pandemic gave us an added challenge. So that's why we are today.
Just like for everyone else. Thank you so much, Shahnaz. Veronica, can I ask you to introduce yourself? I know you also have a finance background, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Zhou. I'm an edtech investor in China. So we are for-profit, we are early stage venture capital. We invest in education projects that use the technology to enable the education equity and education efficiency in China. About my background, yes, I'm from finance background. I have never been an educator. I was born in central China. I was lucky enough to went to Tsinghua, went to INSEAD, went to Stanford. Now looking back, I am one of the millions of Chinese kids who have seen my fate changed by education. So that's why we are very passionate about what we do here in China. And also coming back from the Silicon Valley, like Donnie just mentioned, we believe in technology. We kind of believe that the majority of our daily life tasks will be moved online. We totally see a digital future there. And we think about what education should be like, what kind of education could we offer to our next generation kids, and what kind of things we should educate them with. So we are not non-for-profit organization. We are serious about using technology and capital to boost the entire education market.
Thank you so much, Veronica. If I can just ask Jeff. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself? Hi. Yes, we can hear you. Sorry, Jeff, are you speaking? Hi, Jeff. Do we have you? No. Okay. So maybe Jeff, if your connection is a bit better, you can just type in the chat box, and then we will get you to introduce. But meanwhile, I'll go straight into the questions. So Veronica, I want to start with you. So given your experience working in EdTech, how difficult or how easy is it for teachers to transition from traditional classrooms to now using EdTech tools in teaching?
Well, a short answer is there is only difficult and more difficult.
Okay.
Into this. So, okay, let me start with my information source, like where I got my information and what experience have shaped my view. So far, we have been doing EdTech investment in China for 5 years. We have 80 portfolio companies. About 60 of them are in the private sector. Basically, it's like two consumer, two parent, two student business model. And about 20 of them are to the school sector. We call it to school or 2G, which means that we sell EdTech softwares, tools, hardwares, enterprise solutions to the school system. So to answer your question, I have to divide them into two parts as well. So the first part is for the private sector. They are better motivated to adopt the newest generation of technologies because it has everything to do with their efficiency, their profitability, and also their teachers are comparatively less trained and less experienced. You seldom find like 20 years tenure teachers in the private sector. So they are more willing to try new technologies, and they have performed notably better during the pandemic in adopting new technologies, switching online, and things like that. And in comparison, let's talk about the public sector in China. Historically, it actually has been our single largest challenge to persuade teachers in the public school system to use new equipment and new tools. And just a piecemeal of information, the leading hardware provider in China has sold about 200,000 pieces of equipment into the public school system over China. And our data in 2009 shows that many of the equipments were used less than 10 days during 2019. That's less than 10 days over a year. And it's pretty expensive for the public education system to spend that much of their budget on the hardware and equipment. But they did not have proper training procedures. They did not know how to help the teachers to use them. And naturally, the public school teachers are very reluctant to use this new technology. The third part of that answer is the most interesting part. So what happened during the pandemic is that as early as February, the public school system knew that they have to switch online. Like the entire nation had to switch online over 2 weeks. That created a lot of chaos in the country, in the system. Like they did not have enough training, they didn't have enough equipment. And what we saw is that the private sector actually chipped in to help training the public sector. It's a private sector action. They have to train their customers to sell more of their equipment or software. But nonetheless, the private sector had the know-how. They had the expertise of helping teachers to use online technology and online tools effectively. So we saw a very impressive coordinated effort between February and March when the private sector helped the public school system to get online. And the technology know-how among public school teachers have been boosted due to that reason.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thought that was really interesting how you gave the comparison between the private sector, the motivation of the teachers to use technology, and then the public sector as well. I think that's something lots of other countries face. Shahnaz, so we know in Malaysia, mostly all our schools are public schools, are government schools, right? What do you think, how is the transition like for our teachers to get on board with EdTech?
Well, digitization or getting EdTech into education is not something that happens just because of the pandemic. And we've been working on it, I don't know, for donkey years, I would say, but for at least a decade. Veronica, we have the same observation. So public school and the private and international school, the take-up rate is very, very different. It's very a marked difference. So here, if you look at even before, there were no catalysts, and they were really, you know, I mean, and if I could divide into 3 categories that they need to use EdTech in, so to speak, right? One is in the curriculum itself, the content, preparing the kids to be living in a digital world kind of thing. Second is in their delivery. How do they use EdTech in the delivery? And the third is the tools or the resources that they actually use in their lessons. The first one, I think, is probably the best among the 3. I mean, in terms of incorporation of content. Using the tools and the delivery side, a lot of teachers kind of refrain a little bit from using it. In fact, if the students run the lessons, it's a lot better sometimes than teachers, right? I mean, that's our observation. So, you know, and but of course, I think with the pandemic, that's why I say, do not let the crisis go to waste, because really it became so catalytic that teachers have no choice in most situations to actually use it, especially from a delivery perspective. But I just want to say, I think we started with a problem statement when pandemic, well, MCO, the Movement Control Order in Malaysia, took place, I think sometime in mid-March. We challenged ourselves and said, okay, what is the first issue? The first issue in Malaysia is, you know, is connectivity. MOE data, Ministry of Education data, shows that 60% only have either the connectivity and the device required to actually do online learning, and 40% doesn't. That is at a broad level data. Our data, of course, we are a bit restricted. We have about 200 schools, about 10,000 teachers, about 60,000 students involved. But we see that 60% actually vary quite a lot. They are, you know, the 40% that don't have access, for example, in some schools, is 80 or 90% that don't have access, right? And some schools, of course, that maybe 10 or 20. So they average it out. But if you look at the profile of the school, connectivity was a real issue. But when we said, okay, if we got connectivity sorted, would the learning continue to take place? That was a question we throw our advisors. And unfortunately, we find that it's not the case either. Because even if there's connectivity, teachers really have to transform the way they think about how they're actually going to deliver their plans, their lesson plans. And there is a fundamental assumption around a child who is actually, to a certain extent, has to have some independence. Right? You know, the teacher can be in front of the computer, but if the child chooses not to be in front of the computer, you know, it's still an issue. And then there is, of course, a dependency on parents. Now, I'm talking about the public schools where about 60% probably you know, come from low middle income to bottom income. And what happens during the pandemic is that everybody has to stay in a very confined spaces. Right, and you know, 6 or 7 people in a family in like a small 2-bedroom house, it's just not conducive for learning. In fact, in the first 3 to 4 weeks, I think all our teachers were actually working on making sure the children are safe, welfare are taken care of, basic needs are addressed. Parents who are normally daily wage worker lost income, right? They are stressed. They are not able to put food on the table. They're not thinking about whether the children will be learning maths or English or Bahasa Malaysia. I mean, that's the real truth. So I mean, the driver at that point in time is getting the teachers to put the students first and addressing their needs first. Now, I think later on, we begin to work on, so the 60% that have access, we then talk about effective delivery, because quite a lot of teachers reverted to, you know, I give assignments, I give homework, you know, 20% maybe got it back, 10% maybe gave back feedback to the child. So is that really learning? Was the question, right? So even though they access it, but whether learning is really happening. Now the 40% that doesn't have access, I mean, is really quite heart-wrenching, because to me it's a huge inequity at that point already. And I think a lot of our teachers have to be very creative on using manual anyway and addressing it. we had to do a lot of things around getting parents to do something about it. For example, we are working on mobile because I know it's interesting in China to see a very high smartphone, but in Malaysia, actually mobile penetration is very high, but it's not using smartphone, they are just data phone, right? Yeah, so we actually develop or convert a lot of learning instructions to a very data easily applicable that can be sent to parents, and maybe parents can then help their children in their learning. And this is addressing the B40 issue actually. Yeah, but that, you know, but for whatever it's worth, I think there is still a gap, I think, which today we may face the need to actually address the gap.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was really interesting. Thank you so much. I liked how you said, like, even with the connection, I mean, there wasn't much learning happening. I think this goes back exactly to what Johnny shared just now in his case study, right? Like the moment the students came back to school, the teachers realized they don't know what they were learning during the pandemic. If I can just, I thought I saw Jeff online just now. I wanted to ask him the next question. Jeff, are you here? He's not. Veronica, can I ask you? You are. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, Veronica, then I will ask you then. So I think very interestingly how Shana's pointed out about the, even with connection, online learning was still a struggle to happen, and same thing as Donnie said just now. So do you think, what is missing in that EdTech space for learning to happen meaningfully online?
For learning to happen meaningfully online. Well, that's okay. Here, I get my video. Great, thank you.
That's better.
That's such a difficult question. So, okay, let me share some of my observations. So I'm in Beijing, the capital of China, and in May, there was a brief window when school were reopened, then quickly shut down again due to the second wave. And during that short window, we observed that the first 2 months of stay at home and online education has been ineffective. It's not what we wanted it to. It didn't do the job we wanted it to do. Reflect in first the test record, the test results has been unsatisfactory. And second, the children are experiencing eye problems for spending long hours online. And that has caused quite some anxiety among the education and EdTech community here. So now we are also reflecting on what you said there, like what needs to happen to make online education better. So first, I think we need better software solution. Let me share one example. In the beginning, most of the online classroom are like one teacher and 30 students. We're trying to recreate the physical classroom. Then we realized that students feel quite lonely there. Like they lost that communication with their classmates. They lost the atmosphere in the classroom. So now those software companies are developing more user-friendly softwares. It's an online world, but our online reflection of the classroom learning should not be exactly like, it should not be simply moving the classroom online. It takes a better product design. Now they are engineering in classmate interactions. They are building in more AI assistants to make sure that each student feel that they are taken care of. And they are also, so this is the software side. Methodology side, the students, all the teachers are working really hard to try to understand how to teach better. It's not easy. I'm talking about the best teachers in China, and they are struggling to teach in the most effective way because their usual contact with the student are cut off, and they are trying to figure out how to take care of more students. And the third point is that we are seeing other different tools and methods to help enhance the study at home experience. I'm talking about, so we invest in one app called Timing. Basically, it's study group online. Like the kids miss their study groups. Kids miss like, let's do our homework together. That's psychological, and that also helps the effectiveness of their learning. So some people are doing that. And the other group of entrepreneurs are doing psychological support for students. It's terribly lonely for those kids, especially for China. Like the majority of the kids are still like still from single child family. It's pretty terrible for them to spend 2 months at home studying online. So those new applications, softwares, tools, and methods are being developed really quickly in China. We are excited to see those development. We wish they could be faster because students like there are a lot of real suffering here, and we believe that it will be like, I believe that with all those entrepreneurs, all the teachers trying really hard to find a solution, the online learning experience will be improved over the next year.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I think it's really exciting to hear things like classmate interaction, AI, and all of that. And I remember my own daughter, when she started online learning, she doesn't want to go back to school now because she says she can do it all on her laptop. So, Jeff, I understand that you are online now. And yes, okay. So if I can just quickly ask you, initially this question was for you, but you can take it as well. What do you think is still missing in the edtech space? And Veronica spoke a bit about the interaction, the AI part, and all of that. And on your perspective, what do you think is still missing that we can do better?
If you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
So just make it very short because of the tech issue.
Okay.
I just make one point. Since now I see the biggest change is now students are allowed legally to bring in their electronic device into the classroom. You know, my daughter is at her 14 and she is at K8 or to K9. So before, they're not allowed to bring their electronic device like mobile phone or iPad into their classroom. Very seldom. And now they're encouraged to use them. So this is the biggest you can see. And what's the biggest problem for the K-12 education in China or somewhere else in the state, in the world, I think is people pay too many time in the classrooms to earn a high score. If they want to go to a good high school, if they go to a good university, they pay too much time in the classroom and waste their time. And the ability is not suitable for future, and we can see that. And nowadays, I think if we say any disruptive change is how this online trade can help education for good and education for all, and education for future. So from my view, I think one thing very good is people pay more attention on how to make this device really provide enough space for the change. Like I just want to introduce one case study from China. This is a big cop. This is a new high school. So they are not actually a school in the public system, because the public system is not so friendly with social entrepreneurship. So this is a school, Moonshot is a school, a high school set up by a high school student. So he set up this high school at his 19. So they actually use a lot of online training and blended learning this thing there to test how to avoid to waste too many time on the subjects to earn a high score. So I think most important thing here when we're talking about after or post-pandemic is we can use technology to encourage this trade, just how to value the time for learning. So for us, I think we do impact investing, we do capital job, we do a lot of funding and sponsorship in China, basically on two issues. One thing is like this for all, like inclusive development. Another thing is how to make it very innovative, to change the objective of education, to change objective of people's learning time. So for us, I guess we think that this online education, we really wanted to encourage more, not on high school, but on the future capacity. So all our efforts actually is made on that point. I stop now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really like how the high school set up by the high school students. I think if I was listening correctly. So I will bring this next question to Shahnaz. Shahnaz, Jeff mentioned just now about mobile phones being allowed in schools. Do you think Malaysia will make that leap as well now that we have gone into digital education and perhaps, you know, make the whole transition to online learning easier by allowing our students to bring mobile phones to school?
I will say very uncertain on it. I think they will probably need to have much more changes from mindset perspective. But I think it's also about readiness and the preparedness, right? I think we talk about preparing everybody in Malaysia for a digital world because it's not as simple as that, I think, as Veronica said. So when in a digital world, I mean, you know, just like you need to be a good citizen in the physical world, you also need to be a good citizen in the digital world. And if you think about the high-risk groups today, I mean, you know, the primary schools and the secondary schools. Primary schools, I think less than 13 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where social media put kind of the legal age for them to enter. But for the secondary schools, I mean, they're already entering. The question is, how are we preparing them, right? So it's not just the hardware, but how are we preparing them to be a good citizen in the digital world? You know, do they know the signs of cyberbullying? Do they know if they are cyberbullying people, right? Right? So what's the security? Do they have digital confidence? Because it's about their footprint too. I think this is a lot of us students are not aware that later when they're trying to find jobs, you know, HR today doesn't just look at resume and interviews, right? They actually find the digital footprint, right? They actually go to their Facebooks, etc. I mean, so, you know, kids need to understand that there is that. And I think there is, and that's part of education for me, right? So are we preparing our kids for a digital world? I mean, that's a question. So it's not just a hardware thing. I think and if you talk about, you know, public school teachers, unfortunately, in the world today, public school system is still where the highest impact is going to be. And given the change issues, unfortunately, I think we still need to make a lot more investment. I mean, and not just digital-wise. I think the last 10 years, we refrained from making technology as a requirement. Because the moment you say technology requirement, for you to do 21st century learning, you need technology, then none of the schools will do. Okay? They just say they won't have infrastructure, right? But so for us, no, you can actually do 21st century learning with no technology, right? So it's the pedagogical ability that has to come alongside the edtech that's coming. So whether they're doing, they're better planners, whether they are better at assessment for learning, whether they are better at differentiation, whether how did they support the students to be collaborative. I mean, all that strategies you can also do not on digital. But the point, I think in the next 10 years, I think we have to recognize that technology has to become almost a must, right? It's almost definitely will be there. So the question is, how do we get teachers to realize that actually this is already, you have to do it. It's not that it's a choice anymore. If you want to be relevant in the children's life, if you really want to have impact to your children, it has to be, that you are also focusing on bringing and using technology in the most effective way. I think we invest a lot in change management in public schools just because we think that's the highest impact. And technology will have to play a big role, I think, in the next 10 years here.
Thank you so much. I think whether we like it or not, technology is here to
Yeah.
stay. And Veronica, I think Shana's brought up a point about digital literacy. You know, as we're talking about all these edtech tools and introducing new things, are our students and even our teachers, do they know how to handle, social media, TikTok or Instagram and all of that? Do they know how to handle things that happen online? Are they looking at their digital footprint? I think, is this something that the edtech space is thinking about? Veronica?
We are more worried about the student. We are more worried about the teachers. I think the students are doing a pretty good job. And on that front, I think, well, I haven't made up my mind yet. There are two conflicting school of thought here. Let me put it that way. So one school is called big data. And we need that. Like we at Blue Elephant Capital, we deeply believe that big data and big data enabled artificial intelligence is the only way forward for China. For other smaller markets, there might be other ways, but for China, it's a market with like, we just have too many students and not nearly enough educational resource. So we need enough educational data to develop AI-enhanced education tools. China will not have enough good teachers, good human teachers. We know that for sure. So we actually need, for this industry to go forward, we actually need schools, public schools, private schools, education institutions, education researchers to be able to collect mass amount of student data on how they learn, how they perceive certain knowledge, and how they understand the world through whatever they have learned. And so far we are still very early stage in that. We hope that if we could be given 20 years of time and freedom on data collection and screening, the scientists and the data engineers will develop a good enough solution to enable adaptive learning and student-centered learning. We need like millions of students' data to make happen a possible adaptive learning software. So that's what school thought is. It's basically we need data. On the other side, let's talk about the data privacy and like how do we treat? So who owns this data? Like who owns my third grade math score or like grade sheet or like whatever I have done back then? And how do I protect myself? Like, do I have the right to wipe my historical record out if I need to? And if a certain huge internet company produces a certain software using my data, do I have the right to know? And do I have the option to opt in or opt out? And so I have seen a lot of really good education entrepreneurs and educators debating over this. Right now, I'm more on I'm closer to the first group because I believe in technology and I believe that we have to use educational data to develop a better product. It's like we have less education, we have less knowledge on how I learn than the knowledge about how healthy I am and like what's my risk of heart disease, and that has to be changed. But on the other side, I think it takes regulation, it takes public debate, and it takes like more conformative discussions let's work out a solution. Let's work out some rules on how we collect this data and how we use this data. And like, does the children have the right to choose, or does the parents have the right to their data. So it's a developing process, and I'm glad to discuss more with other panelists.
Thank you so much. I think that's very interesting. The whole debate on data, like who owns this data, right? Once, and if they use it for the good, does it mean, you know, it can be used, right? I think we're going to go now to taking questions from the floor, or the virtual floor. So I have just one question here. I think Shahnaz will be good to answer this. Most teachers have been trained for face-to-face teaching. Even with good connectivity, wouldn't teachers still need some insights with regards to online teaching? And how can we support in-service teachers so they can pivot to online teaching effectively? Shahnaz, you're on mute, Shahnaz.
Okay, sorry.
All right, okay.
Well, yes, and I don't think it's just insights actually, because it is a different skill to do physical and moving fully to virtual. The principles may remain the same. For example, positive learning environment, that is the same. But how would you do the things that you do physically in virtual? Sometimes you can't do the same thing, but you still have to find ways to do it in order to create that positive learning environment with your students. If you are, you are doing the interactive of inquiry, right? Inquiries or project-based or getting more interaction discussion. So you can do it physically, but so how do you actually do it virtually? We've added a storyline now, collaborative learning, for example, with social distancing. I mean, that's another thing being thrown now, right? Right? So for example, so I guess a principle of the pedagogy would be the same, but I guess the support that you probably need to give to teachers is in some of these are giving a lot of ideas. Either our experience, I think, working with almost 10,000 public school teachers, the professional learning communities has gone virtual now, right? Because they have no choice. Okay, so the moment they come virtual, then they realize, hey, actually, I don't even have to just stop with my own network now, right? I can even other people from other countries, other type of schools and all that. So the professional learning community network has become even stronger in that sense. So the question is that, and they are learning from each other, and I think that's much more probably powerful. So I think what we support them, I think, is allowing them to have these kinds of platform and encouraging them. And I do not have an absolute answer here. I think we've been trying a lot of things. We've done PLCs, we've done webinars. We have a Telegram for all the bright ideas that they all put in. Everybody has been sharing around a lot of these resources. But really, I think at the end, it is about whether that teacher has the agility and the thinking skills, ability to just shift from principal perspective, the what, right? Principle remains the same, but what do you actually kind of do? Being a teacher is a very, very tough job. I believe so, actually.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
It's so much easier to be an accountant and investment professional.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Shahnaz. I was told that I am over time by like 4 minutes, so I'm just going to quickly wrap it up. I think we've had a great discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for contributing to this. I think we have seen like how important is it for schools and education system to get on board with EdTech, but not just during a pandemic, like Shahnaz mentioned. We cannot just get on board because this pandemic happened, but it's really to build an education system that is resilient enough, that knows how to incorporate the different ed tools. I really loved the discussion on digital literacy. How do we train our students to use this responsibility and responsibly, and also Veronica's point on data, right? Who owns the data? Do we take the data and make meaningful sense out of it, or do we just hold on to our data? So I think this is a great discussion, and I hope this doesn't end here. I'm sure the participants can find a way to reach out through AVPN if they want to find out more from everyone. So thank you so much. And I'm so sorry for being 5 minutes over time. Thank you.
No worries, Cheryl. This was a really great discussion. Once again, a thank you to all the panelists for taking time out of your day to join us. I think it was well acknowledged that the COVID-19 crisis will see a long-term impact on many of us, not least of which the impact to the education of our youth and children. AVPN is privileged to be part of this effort to promote and facilitate cross-sector partnerships and learnings to drive impact. This is indeed our mission, and we're glad to have been on this journey with you all today. Thank you to the audience for your enthusiastic participation and questions. We will collate all unanswered questions and share them with the speakers and panelists and upload them on our webinar page in the next few days. You may also access the webinar recording there and share them with your networks as well. Thank you again and see you next time.